Well, my brothers and sisters, great to have you all here tonight. And I know we're recording this talk, so for all those who are watching this talk later, great to have you with us too virtually. This talk tonight, of course, is part of our usual apologetics series. We've tried to find topics of some interest to people. We've talked about hot topics like abortion, like same-sex attraction, like Jesus Christ is king of our hearts rather than a politician. And I thought tonight we could talk about another topic that I think we're all interested in because we all experience it, and that is anger. And can anger be a moral thing? Can anger be part of the moral life, a good life? Can you actually get angry about right things? And the answer is yes. I'm going to cut to the punchline here. The answer is yes. But what about the sin in the 7 deadly sins that's called wrath? And how is that different from righteous indignation, from righteous anger? We're going to talk about that too. But first of all, I want to begin with a passage from the Bible that communicates the Lord's anger. It's a well-known passage. It's found in both the Johannine witness, that is the Gospel of John, and in the Gospels of Mark and Matthew. I don't think it's in Luke, but it's an interesting thing. Similar to the Transfiguration, a couple of other instances where in all of the Gospels, or most of them, including John and the Synoptics, there's a division. There's the Gospel of John, and there's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They're a little bit different perspective. And for example, in the Gospel of John, you have the proclamation of Jesus that he is the bread of life. You don't find that in the other Gospels. You don't find in the Gospel of John many of the parables in the Gospel of Luke. So they're little different perspectives. But there are some instances, like again the Transfiguration, the walking on the water as Jesus approaches the men in the boat, and the turning of the tables in the temple, where you find stories in all of the Gospels, or again, most of them. So, this is significant. The Lord's action is significant, and his anger is significant. This is Matthew 21, verses 12 through 17. Jesus entered the temple area and drove out all those engaged in selling and buying there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and seats of those who were selling doves. Whoa. And he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of thieves." The blind and the lame approached him in the temple area, and he cured them. Interesting, huh? Jesus manifests this anger, at least that's how it's portrayed in many movies. I think it's a reasonable presentation. The Lord, hurling over tables, busting open cages of doves. But the poor and the lame approach him. They're not afraid of his fear. When the chief priests and the scribes saw the wondrous things he was doing, wondrous, it's cause for wonder. We're not talking about wonder like the raising of the dead. We're talking like, what is this man doing? The wonder of what is even happening? And the children crying out in the temple area, "Hosanna to the Son of David," they were indignant. They were upset. They were angry. So you have this contrast of the anger of Jesus and the anger of the chief priests and scribes. And they said to Jesus, "Do you hear what they are saying?" Jesus said to them, "Yes, and you have never read the text. Out of the mouths of infants and nurslings you have brought forth praise." And leaving them, he went out of the city to Bethany, and there he spent the night. Now it can be rightly asked, why is Jesus so upset? The temple area, this place in Jerusalem, was a place of radical importance for the Jews of the Lord's time. Think of it as kind of a combination of St. Peter's in Rome, of Times Square in New York, and trying to think of a third thing. It escapes me. I had it as I was preparing for this, but bottom line, this is a very, very important place. Not only a place of religious significance, where it was believed that God's presence resided, it was also a place of cultural significance and economic significance. Jews from all over the Roman Empire would come to Jerusalem and they would come to the outskirts of the temple where they would pay money changers. They would bring the money from their own part of the empire. They would exchange the money, and then they would buy a sacrifice according to how much money they had. So if you were a wealthy Jew, you could pay for a big sacrifice. If you were a poor Jew, you would pay for a smaller sacrifice, like 2 turtle doves, as we hear Joseph and Mary sacrificed. And why would this setup disturb Jesus so much? After all, this was an accepted practice. It was apparently prescribed by the law. Why does this upset Jesus so much? Well, I happen to believe that the reason why it upset Jesus so much was because it made the mercy of God available through sacrifice, monetary sacrifice, something to be bought. And it made God the matter of an economic exchange. If I give this much, God will forgive me. If I give that, God will forgive me. But God's mercy and God's love cannot be bought. It can't be bartered. The house of prayer, which Jesus speaks of, the temple, which is destroyed a number of decades after the resurrection of Christ, is a description for the place of relationship with God. We don't earn God's love. We don't earn the mercy of God. It's not bought. It's not sold. It's grace. That's what that term means. Grace, freely given, gratis. It is given to us freely by God, and it must be accepted freely and given freely. We forgive one another not because our neighbor earns it, but because we owe it to them insofar as we have received the mercy of God. It must be given freely. It has been received freely. It must be given freely. So Jesus is upset about an injustice. He's angry about an injustice. That the law had made God's mercy and God's love something to be bartered. And insofar as it made God someone to be bought, his love to be bought, it was an injustice against him and his rights and his very nature, all merciful, all loving, gratuitous. Why is Jesus angry? I would offer to you, my brothers and sisters, because he witnesses an injustice, and a grave injustice because it touches upon the nature of God. It's an injustice which touches upon the immortal one and our relationship with him. He is deeply upset, and it moves him to physical acts of violence. It moves him to righteous anger, which inspires and moves him to overturn tables and cause a ruckus. And he's never in the wrong. Jesus, of course, never sinned. He never said no to God. So, therefore, if this action in the temple is, as I say it is, an act of indignation, an act of anger, and Jesus never sins, well, therefore, righteous anger, rightful anger is no sin, and it is not. If you take home anything from tonight, I want that to be at the top of the list. To get angry about things that are worthy of getting angry about is a good and noble thing. It is not a good thing never to get upset. That's not a moral life. And someone who doesn't get angry about worthwhile things has a sleepy soul and a small-mindedness. We should be upset about things that are worthy of getting upset about. The problem, of course, becomes, as we all know, we get upset about stuff that's not worthy about getting upset about. More on that later. What do we say about these passages in the Old Testament where we hear about God's furious anger? What do we say about that? How do we understand these? There's many passages in the Old Testament where Yahweh says, if you do this, my anger will be roused against you. Unless you do this, I will become angry. Now, these passages can be kind of embarrassing, can't they? We think of God as kind of a doting grandfather figure, unable really to get upset, sort of shaking his head in sadness, but ultimately, again, sort of a doughy grandpa. But that's not the presentation given to us in divine scripture. The immortal, the radical other one, gets angry. He gets upset. Now, I'm no scripture scholar, but it seems to me that those passages of the Old Testament where God gets angry, or he says, if you do this, I will get angry, these are expressions of violations of justice. They are violations of justice. Should we think of these Old Testament passages as primarily just the ancient Jewish mind projecting upon God anthropomorphism, that is, making God like us? We get upset, therefore God gets upset. Yahweh is like Zeus or like Jupiter, any of the old mythological characters who get angry. No. What is being described by divine revelation is, again, a way of understanding that God hates injustice. He hates injustice, real injustice. God stands on the side of the afflicted. He stands on the side of the poor who are trampled upon. He is upset in a certain way about injustice. Now, does he get upset as we get upset? No. We get upset in our bodies. We experience the physical movement of the passions, which we'll speak about in a little bit here. God, of course, who is bodiless, does not experience anger as we experience anger, but he does hate injustice. He does hate injustice. And there will be punishment for those who are committed to injustice of any kind. There certainly is a hierarchy of injustices, but God is attentive to such acts, and he loathes them. Even as he allows them, he loathes them, and there will be a reckoning for these acts of injustice. So I would offer to you, my brothers and sisters, that in the Old Testament, all of these passages about God's furious anger, they are communications to us about matters of injustice. It's not just human beings projecting upon God their own feelings and sentiments. No, certainly it is using human language, but it's describing something true about God. His desire, his will, that we are men and women of justice, giving to others what is their due. What is their due? One of the sins that Scripture speaks about that cries out to heaven for vengeance, not giving laborers the just wage. One of the sins that cry out to heaven for vengeance. Why would that bother God so much? Because it is a violation of justice. So, these passages are not just human beings struggling and striving to understand the immortal one. No, there is something true there. When we hear about God getting angry, it comes from a place of recognition of an injustice. Now, let's talk about what is anger for us. How do we experience anger? What is it? Anger is an emotion. It's an emotion. And because it is an emotion, it's a very physical thing. Think about that. Emotions are physical things. They're not so much found in the deepest recesses of the soul, the human soul, which has an intellect and a will. It's a bodily thing. Emotions are bodily things. When we're anxious about something, we feel it in our gut. When we're angry, we clench our teeth, and we, in fact, might even clench our fists, as the case may be. We become red in the face. Anger is found in the body. Emotions and the passions are found in the body. I use this expression, the passions, because this is how the church in her tradition speaks of emotions. It's really a synonym, the passions and emotion. We hear this phrase passion and we might think of romantic passions, but that's not the only passion we've got. We've also got anger. We've got all of the other different kinds of physical reactions, anxiety, like I said before, that would be a passion. Joy, the experience of delight, a pleasure, sitting outside on a beautiful day like today. We experience the physical delight of the sun and the wind. These are all passions. Let's hear what the Catechism of the Catholic Church says about passions, about the emotions. We're going to begin with paragraph 1762. The human person, that's you and me, is ordered to beatitude, eternal happiness, by his deliberate acts. A deliberate act is an act where we know what we're doing and we do it anyways. We're not talking about, irrational movements of the body or dreams, We're not talking about that. We're talking about a deliberate act, a human act. I know what I'm doing and I do it. The passions or feelings they experience can dispose us to a deliberate good act and contribute to it. So the emotions, what they're meant to do, not what they always do, but what they're meant to do is to help us do what we ought to do. That's what they're supposed to do. The emotions are supposed to make the will, supposed to kind of, oil up the engine of the will. Help the will to reach out and to do what the intellect tells it's supposed to do. The emotions and the passions, they assist, that's what they're supposed to do, assist the human person to do what they ought to do. 1763. The term passions belongs to the Christian patrimony. Feelings or passions are emotions or movements of the sensitive appetite, again, of the body, that incline us to act or not to act in regard to something felt or imagined to be good or evil. Imagined. We can think that something is really, really bad, but it's actually kind of good for us. We can be afraid of things that are actually for our benefit. The passions, the emotions, are natural components of the human psyche. Natural. They're not punishments from God. They're given to us by God. The passions are beautiful, wonderful things. We as Catholics, we're not followers of a kind of an Eastern religion that would say, true happiness is found in complete, the blank slate of the soul, You got to find your zen. You got to just you got to be completely unaffected by everything. No, that's not the Catholic vision of reality. We love to celebrate. We love to have a good time. We love beautiful and good things. These are all part of our understanding of the goodness of nature. And we are supposed to get angry about angry-worthy things. The emotions form the passageway and ensure the connection between the life of the senses, the body, all of the data we receive about the world is through the senses, all of it, and the life of the mind. There are many emotions. The most fundamental passion is love. I would offer here a bit of a distinction. We're not talking here about caritas, the virtue of the will. We're talking about affection, sentiments, a crush, love. Aroused by the attraction of the good, beauty, a wonderful scent, wonderful words, whatever. Or even not just about erotic love, talking about, love for nature. Oh, this is awesome. This park is beautiful. We love it. I love pizza, We love pizza in a different kind of way, obviously. In this way, we can speak about love, attraction. Love causes a desire for the absent good and the hope of attaining it. This movement finds completion in the pleasure and the joy of the good possessed. I got it. The apprehension of evil causes hatred, aversion, fear of the impending evil. All of these things are emotions. Fear, drawing back. Fear is a very physical thing, Very physical. Hatred here is not so much the act of the will. I choose to hate you. That can happen. It's an aversion. Something about this person or the situation makes me really, really upset. Might not even be able to explain it. Personality conflicts. This movement ends in sadness at some present evil or in the anger that resists it. Just a few more words here from the Catechism. 1767. In themselves, emotions are neither good nor evil. In themselves, emotions, passions, are neither good nor evil. Very important to remember. Oftentimes you might imagine in the confessional, we hear, Father, I get so upset, I get so angry. And that in and of itself is not a sin. It's not a sin. Especially if you are a fan of the Minnesota Vikings. Just kidding. All right, just kidding. We can get angry, get upset. But we can get upset about worthwhile things. We can also get upset knowing full well that it's irrational about stupid stuff. About stupid stuff. In and of themselves, the emotions are morally neutral. I don't care how intense they are, how angry you get, or how much lovey-dovey feeling you got inside. In and of themselves, these things are morally neutral. It's exactly why, by the way, you can't judge your spiritual life based upon feelings. Oh, I love Jesus. I love prayer. I love churchy things. But our will is never engaged in actually living the faith, loving the poor, offering sacrifice. Similarly, we can have an extremely unpleasant experience in prayer. We come to adoration and we are bored out of our mind. We just sit there and we're distracted and we're not there in our emotions. That in and of itself is not something to be alarmed about. Your emotions, your feelings, they're morally neutral. They are morally qualified only to the extent that they effectively engage reason and will when they make us or help us do things that we ought to do or that we ought not to do. Passions are said to be voluntary, this is kind of interesting, either because they are commanded by the will or because the will does not place obstacles in their way. It belongs to the perfection of the moral or human good, a good life, that the passions be governed by reason. What does this mean? Passions are said to be voluntary because they are commanded by the will or because the will does not place obstacles in their way. Well, one can think of a couple of examples. One at work begins to fixate upon what your neighbor is doing in the cubicle. You begin to fixate on it. You know full well it's not a big deal, I don't know, maybe your neighbor's taking off their shoes at work, okay, And but you constantly are bringing it up in your mind, constantly. You're fixating it. You talk about it with your friends at night as you're drinking, I can't believe what this person is doing. And you put fuel on the fire. You are drawing up the emotions. One can think of, a disordered or unhelpful attraction. And you constantly are thinking about it or exposing yourself to it. And it's working up all these emotions that cannot have a good end. But you are unwilling to draw back. So, we speak about these passions, these emotions as being voluntary when we give them fuel. I know I'm getting upset. I got to step back. I got to separate myself from the situation. This anger is not going to be helpful. It's going to disrupt the situation. I'm going to separate myself. We have to do that at certain points. All right, one more. Strong feelings are not decisive for the morality or the holiness of persons. They are simply the inexhaustible reservoir of images and affections in which the moral life is expressed. Passions or emotions are morally good when they contribute to a good action, evil in the opposite case. The upright will orders the movements of the senses. It appropriates to the good and to beatitude. An evil will succumbs to disordered passions and exacerbates them. Emotions and feelings can be taken up into the virtues or perverted by the vices. We can shape and form our emotions. We can change what we get upset about. Not always in everything, no. But oftentimes we can form our emotions and we can shape them. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of effort. But my goodness, isn't that what human formation is for kids? 4-year-old kid, I want my dinner. I'm a 41-year-old boy. I still feel those sentiments, okay? I want my dinner, but I don't, have a tantrum about it. We can control our emotions, even if the desires are very strong. And let me tell you, the desire for dinner is strong. Okay. So, let's talk a little bit about the nature of how emotions are stirred up. How is anger or affection stirred up? We perceive something, we see something, an experience, a situation, a vision, we hear something. Our bodies experience the data of sensation. Our bodies. That's the first place of contact for reality because we're bodily beings. Even our understanding of God comes through the body. We receive divine revelation through words, which are bodily things. Our experience of reality is bodily It is bodily, whether we like it or not. So this experience is fed to the intellect. The will has the human soul has two powers. It has an intellect and it is a will. When we say intellect, we're not just talking about the capacity to do math. Fundamentally, the human intellect is that godlike part of us that can see the authentic good and can choose destiny for ourselves. And we can order goods. Remember in the book of Genesis, God looks upon creation and says it is good. That's what the intellect does. It looks upon things and says, this is good. This is good. Unfortunately, the intellect is darkened because of the fall. So we don't always recognize the real good. We can see something that we perceive as good, but the intellect is off. The intellect is off. We're presented with something that draws us to itself, but we know is going to burn us, Like a Big Mac mixed with a McDonald's shake or something, This looks fantastic, even if we know that it's not really good. So, the intellect is given this data from sense. The intellect perceiving the good or the illusion of the good inspires in the body, kind of a loop here, an emotional response. The intellect sees something, and based upon its evaluation, it gives back to the body how the body should feel about it. How it should feel about it. Now, what would an appropriate emotional response of anger be towards? What kind of data? Well, I would like to offer that what should upset us are two fundamental things. What should make us angry are two things. One, we've already addressed in the beginning of our talk. Injustice. Real, authentic injustice. And to the degree that we are dealing with a manifest and grave injustice, it should make us more angry. The moral man, the moral woman gets upset about upset-worthy things. The second area that we should be angry about is if a good in our life is in danger. And depending upon the level of good, our immortal soul, the health and well-being of our family, our physical own well-being and comfort, our level of anger should rise to the occasion of the hierarchy of values. Hierarchy of values, what's that? The immortal good of being forever with God in heaven, pretty high in the value level. The safety and well-being of my family, that's pretty high. My own comfort, my own well-being, that's a real good, and it's something worth getting upset about if we are authentically being attacked. So an injustice or a danger. Now, why would God put into the human body the passion of anger? What purpose does this hold in the face of an injustice or of a danger? It helps us to act. Anger helps us to act. Because the intellect is darkened, it doesn't always recognize the real good. But the other power of the soul, the will, which helps us to reach out to it, I choose this thing, I recognize it's a good, the will reaches out to it to take it or to receive it. Our will's weak, and we can be cowards, and we can loathe conflict. And because of this, even though we recognize an injustice intellectually, that's just not right. That's just not right. We're weak. So sometimes we are not inclined to act when we should because of a weakness in the will or a weakness in the intellect if we're not actually seeing an injustice. But let's talk about someone who actually sees the injustice but refuses to act. What anger is meant to do is to serve again as a kind of a lubricant for the engine of the will. I know this in my own experience. I am a pretty easygoing guy, okay? Maybe the sweat in my brow might lead you to think differently, but I'm a pretty easygoing guy. And it takes an awful lot really to get me upset. But sometimes I should get upset. I should get more angry because this requires action, and anger inspires action. Sometimes it's destructive action, but it inspires action, and that is a good and noble thing. In and of itself, the anger is morally neutral, but it propels us to action. If it propels us to a good action, it is righteous indignation, I would offer. If it propels us to a bad action, it could be sinful anger. Again, its moral reality comes into play based upon the decision of the will and what is the thing to be pursued. If my emotions are getting the best of me and I'm saying all kinds of vile things to my loved ones, your emotions have caused you to sin. But the sin is in the will. The emotions have kind of pushed it. If your anger at, let's say, an injustice by your neighbor, literally your physical neighbor in the block, and your family is being terrorized by a neighbor, the movement of the emotions can help you to act in defense of your family within reason. I'm not talking about something crazy here, okay? It's moving you to action. This has to stop. This has to stop. A teacher in a classroom could become upset and angry about bad behavior. Now that emotion of anger could move the teacher to do things that they should never do. But it can also move the teacher, the mild-mannered Father Erickson, to actually establish boundaries in the classroom. And to say, you know what? I don't care if this is going to upset you. You got to sit in your seat, Tommy. You got to sit there. Anger can move us to right action. So anger, why does God give us anger? Because it is a God-given emotion, anger, to help us do the right thing. It helps us do the right thing. Remember that, getting back here to the powers of the soul, the intellect and the will, animals, your wonderful dog has a will. Oh, you're going to tell me, yes, Father, my dog has a will, that's for sure. The dog can do what it wants to do. You tell the dog to do something and it does the exact opposite. Your dog, no matter how wonderful Fido is, does not have the kind of intellect that you have. Again, what I mean by that is not just the intellect able to do math problems or to memorize history facts, but to recognize the authentic good. Oh, it's true, your dog can recognize the goodness of dog food, but your dog couldn't tell you why that is so attractive to the dog. All the dog could tell you is, I want that, I want that. What makes us human is our capacity to recognize the good and to choose it, the authentic good. A well-ordered, well-examined life, the moral life, is a well-reasoned life. But not, again, the kind of well-reasoned life that you might think of Spock or Data living out, These are Star Trek characters. Sort of computing, what should I do, what is the good? No. Emotions are part of the human experience. And what is supposed to happen is, again, our emotions are in accord with the authentic good. Now, we spoke about the intellect being darkened. We don't always recognize the real good. We've spoken about the will as being the power of the will to reach out. That's weakened. How are the passions affected by the fall? Because they're affected too. Well, they can be absent. We can have no feeling whatsoever about the sufferings of others. We can be minimally concerned about real injustices. We can also have intense passions, intense feelings, and some people have this. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it makes life kind of hard. You feel things very, very deeply. They can be difficult to control, our emotions, and they can spiral out of control if we're not careful. So the passions are fallen, they're broken. They don't always give us great data, and they don't always help us unless we are striving to form them and to shape them. What is a moral life? Again, I say it is a well-ordered, reasoned life. We contemplate the good. What is best for me? What is best for my family? Not what feels good, but what is best. The moral life is a reasonable life. That is, it's a life ordered by reason. And what does reason look for? The good, the true, the beautiful. These things should direct us. So, what about wrath? Talk about the 7 deadly sins. Wrath is in there. How are we supposed to understand that? If anger is not a sin, simply a passion, which is morally neutral, how are we supposed to understand wrath? Well, I would say that wrath is a disordered passion because of its intensity and what is more, because it leads to vengeance. What is the end, that is the goal of wrath? Vengeance, not justice. Vengeance. And what is vengeance? We want the other to suffer. We don't want to make things right. We don't want to stop the evil. We want the other person to suffer as we have suffered. That is wrath. That's an emotional response that compels us to act in a way that is destructive. But wrath cannot be confused with just intense anger. No. It's what it leads to. That's where the problem is found. What does it cause you to do? What does the will choose because of this intense, violent anger? It desires vengeance. All of the deadly sins I would offer, all of them, are a disordered good. They're all rooted in good things, but it's a disordered attachment to it or an elevation of them. Chastity, self-control. Being attracted to attractive people is not a bad thing. Being attracted to someone who is attractive is natural and good. It indicates that you're alive. The problem, of course, with lust becomes this inordinate attachment and attraction that you can feed into. Gluttony. We Catholics, we love our wonderful food, our, Jameson, for example. But it must be enjoyed well, that is, within reason. When it's not enjoyed within reason, it becomes the problem. Sloth. My gosh, everybody needs a vacation. Everybody needs time to chill out and to relax. But when we have this inordinate attachment to this good of physical relaxation, we got a problem. So, wrath too. It's rooted in a good. Anger in and of itself can move us to good. But when it moves us to vengeance, we have a problem. So my friends, I'd like to offer now some tactics about how to form anger, how to form the morally neutral, God-given gift of anger. God-given gift of anger. First of all, we have to examine ourselves. What makes us angry? What really upsets us? Is it real injustice? Is it real threats to myself or to my family? Or do we fundamentally get upset about inconveniences, about situations where we're put out? It's not so much a threat to my family that makes me mad, it's a threat to my pride that makes me mad. It's when my person is not acknowledged as I want to be acknowledged. So what makes us angry? We have to be people of self-analysis. What really ticks me off? And are they things that are worthwhile getting upset about? Now, that knowledge is not necessarily going to make these emotions go away, but at least it can give you some impetus to control them. Okay, I find myself getting upset again. I know this is upsetting to me. I know it's an irrational anger. I got to deal with this. It's not going to force me into action. Easier said than done, I know. One question I'd ask you to examine is, am I upset? Do I get angry about things that I actually can control? Do I get upset about stuff that I actually can change? Because that's the purpose of anger, to change things, to proceed in action. Or do I get upset about things that I have no say in whatsoever? And if we are getting so robbed of our peace by something that we have absolutely no control over, we probably need to examine that for our sake and for the sake of our family and probably our spouse too. I said this a couple of days ago. There's so many blogs out there, so many blogs about church life and church struggles, and how often we can get upset about things that we have absolutely no control over, decisions that bishops make halfway around the world. We need to get upset about the things that we can control and that are in our own life. It's also very important, talking about taming and controlling anger, forming it, shaping it, to remember that like lust and like attraction, physical attraction, not necessarily a sinful attraction, just physical attraction, anger is a bodily thing. And because of that, balance of life is very important. I remember in college being asked by Father Della Torre, I've shared this before, certain struggles with the passions of various kinds. And Father Della Torre said, "Are you running? Are you running? How's your diet?" And I said, "Father, I'm looking for a confessor, not a life coach here, okay? Come on." But the fact is that how we treat our body actually affects how we can control our emotions. And again, look to your kids, to your infant children. When they are hungry, when they are tired, what happens? You get a full-blown case of hangry. So too in our own life as adults. I'm tired, I'm stressed out, I'm hungry, I don't have a lot of friends, I'm sitting in front of my TV most of the time. All of these things are going to contribute. They're going to contribute to struggles with the passions. It's why, again, I say, just like with struggles with lust, if you have a real problem with anger, sure, say your rosaries, say your chaplets to St. Joseph, the meek one, but also get to bed on time. Don't be staying up until 11:30 or 12:30 or 1:30 in the morning and getting up at 5 or 5:30 and think that you can overcome this struggle. These things are bodily struggles. Are we giving our bodies a natural outlet? Exercise, whatever. These things are important. We do have to be people of prayer as well. We have to pray for self-control. We have to pray for those situations that make us upset. And pray for wisdom, an enlightenment of the intellect to know what should make us upset. All right. So what about virtuous anger? What about righteous indignation? We should pray for righteous indignation about things that are worthy of indignation. We need to pray for a deep respect and love for the rights of God, for the rights of God and the rights of the church. We have to pray for these things, a deep love for them, a desire for them, especially the rights of God. Again, there's lots of talk these days about social justice, rightly so. But let's remember who our primary duty is towards. God. The matter of Sunday obligation, that's a matter of justice to God. We don't go to church just because it gives us a nice inspirational message from the pulpit. It is an act of duty to God, to whom we owe thanksgiving. So we have to be concerned about the rights of God. And then we have to be concerned about the rights of persons, especially the poor, the weak, the underprivileged. We have to have a special concern about their rights, the meekest and littlest among us. A special concern for these rights. We have to pray for a deep desire that the rights of human beings are respected and that our passions might be stirred when we see them being violated. What about in our life where there's real danger? Are we angry about these things? I've spoken to parents who really are visibly angry about struggles in the world because of how it affects their kids. I think that's noble. I think that's good. I think you should be angry about these things because it will inspire you to protect your kids within reason, of course, within reason. Is there a presence of anger within us about, again, those situations in our own life or in our family that are destructive to family unity? Do we have an anger towards these things? Anger untowards action? Again, I say we have to pray that we might be angry about the right things. Authentic injustice, real danger. And depending upon the hierarchy of values, our anger should be more or less. A lack of anger in our life does not necessarily mean that we are living a good life. Getting angry about angry, worthy things is good and noble. The virtuous person living a right-ordered life has their emotions prompt them to actions which are good or evil based upon the evaluation of reason, assisted by their emotions. The virtuous person finds it easier to do good than the vicious person. That is, someone who has been striving to live according to reason over a long period of time. And as it becomes easier to do good, the emotions are formed and shaped. As it becomes easier to do evil, the emotions are also formed and shaped, like the absence of real anger in the face of injustice. You just don't care. Doesn't affect you, so why should you get upset? Not good. Not good. Anger helps us persevere in the pursuit of a noble good. That's one of the powers of anger. It helps us to do what we ought to do and to persevere in it. Anger can give you a lot of energy, can give you a lot of focus. And if it's directed to a good, use it well. If it's directed to vengeance, it must be snuffed out. All right. So, bottom line, is anger a sin in and of itself? No. No. It's an amoral, without moral value, passion that helps us do the good or impedes us from doing the good, based upon our life, based upon our habits, based upon our virtues or vices. But even if we have emotions that are unruly, even if we have anger that is not yet fully ordered to the good, there's hope, progress, through prayer, through self-analysis, through balance of life. Just because you get angry doesn't mean that you are far from God, because he got angry, and he still gets angry in the face of injustice. All right. I wanted to take just a few minutes and see if there's any questions or concerns, pious indignation about anything I said tonight. We do have refreshments, I think, out in the gathering space too. So I think we might have some beer out there, which can help or hinder the passions, by the way. Yeah, so Elda asked the question, oftentimes we find ourselves angry about a situation, and it can inspire, in the midst of a conversation, words that we don't necessarily mean, or we put something that's true, but in a way that is difficult for the person to receive it. I think a couple of things. One is, if we know we're going to enter into a conversation or situation that could be emotionally charged at the outset, we have to pray about that. We have to consider, too, am I going to be in a situation here where my emotions are going to get the best of me? Because, again, what did the emotions do? They push the will. They move the will. And if we find ourselves getting upset, and it's unhelpful, because sometimes I think it can be helpful. For example, speaking to a child, and they need to know how bad what they did is. Anger can actually be quite a good thing to communicate to them the awareness of the evil. But in a conversation with a colleague or, with someone else where you're trying to communicate something, we all know that at times the emotion behind it can close the other person off. So we always have to keep our eyes on the prize, eyes on the goal, eyes on the end. What's the purpose of this conversation? I want to communicate to them the goodness of my position, the goodness of the church's position. And is my anger or is my emotion about this helping or hindering the actual end which my intellect sees? Is my anger helping the other person be open to what I am saying, or is it closing them off? And if it's closing them off, my emotions are counter to my goal here. So it's becoming disordered. It's ordered to something which is not my actual end. And sometimes in a situation like that, we got to walk away. We got to say, you know what? Mom or Sarah or whomever, I am really getting upset, and I want us to talk about this in a way that is good for both of us. Can we come back to this? I know, easier said than done. I get it. We all know that's what we should do. But if we find ourselves, if our emotions are ramping up, making it difficult to do what we ought to do, we should probably pull back and call a timeout whenever possible. Please. Absolutely. Yeah, great question. So the question was, there are many instances, of course, where we read of or hear about laws that are unjust. We believe that they are a violation of the common good or of human dignity, and they upset us, and they should. They should upset us. They should make us upset. And certainly what I am, I want to clarify my statement that the experience of emotion about an injustice that is passed on the federal level or otherwise that we can't control or we have minimal control over, it's not so much the anger that's the problem. It's where I see the issue is the focusing on it and it clouds our vision in other areas. We become hyper focused on a particular evil, which is evil and worthy of being upset and speaking to our friends and family about it. I don't think there's anything wrong. There are some families where they gather together and they talk politics. Now, that ain't the Ericksons, but it could be anybody else. And that's just part of the culture there, and it's good. And, the problem becomes when there's a fixation. And, just like it's a problem and disorder if there's a fixation in an attraction, so too there can be a problem with fixation and anger. In and of itself, the anger is not the problem. It's that if we find ourselves, this is not so much a rational response as much as sort of an illustration. If that's all we're talking about is just this particular law, all we're able to focus on is this, then I think that there's something a little off there. Not that the anger about an unjust law, we think about the rights of the unborn, that should inspire anger, that should. The question is, does it cloud our judgment in other areas? Does that become really the only thing in our life? And it dilutes our attention to our family and to our duties and our state of life. It's all a question of order, and it's a question of right reason. Virtue is in the mean. So, just like Goldilocks, it's not too much, it's not too little, just right. And so too I'd say with anger about these very situations you're saying. I'll try to wrap it up in a bow here. The anger in and of itself are things we can't control, not the problem. The problem becomes if we're fixated on these things to the detriment of other areas of our life that demand our attention. Please. Yeah. The question was, how do we navigate? How do we discern how to act when we must speak about an issue that is very problematic and very divisive, and we know is going to inspire anger? Again, though, I would say the virtuous life, the virtuous conversation, has a good end. And if my purpose in speaking about a particular topic is meant to communicate what I'm convinced is an authentic good, an authentic value, even if it is a challenging topic, at times I might have a duty to speak about that. Even if I know this is the person I'm speaking to or the crowd I'm speaking to, it's going to upset them, but I still have to say this. An example, you mentioned some hot button topics, but even Jesus Christ is Lord, the words of Scripture, there is no other way to heaven except through Jesus. That's a statement that could inspire a great deal of animosity, but it's also the truth. It has to be communicated with love. We shouldn't, as Christians, I think it would be immoral to deliberately, actually I shouldn't say it to deliberately make people angry, because some things we should try to make people angry about, angry-worthy things. The problem becomes if, in sort of a roundabout, subtle way, I think, we can try to make people angry for vengeance's sake. So we're not trying to make them angry so that they will do the good, This is terrible, this is evil. We think of all kinds of different speeches. This is terrible, you need to rise up and act. The speaker is trying to make the crowd angry for a good thing. But if the speaker is trying to make the crowd angry so that he can control them, so that he can manipulate them, so that he can exercise a kind of vengeance, I'm going to make you feel upset because it doesn't feel nice, and I don't want you to feel nice. All that to say, motivation matters. Motivation matters. Why am I saying what I am saying? Is it to deliberately upset people unnecessarily? Or do I need to get them upset so that they might act? Motivation matters. All right. Well, thank you all for your presence tonight, for your great questions, and let's pray that we might be upset about worthy things, that we might be angry about things that are worth getting angry about. and may it propel us to action, noble, good action, for the glory of God and the rights of human beings. Please kneel.